Elijah, he's 5, and he was born at 26.5 weeks. So he was very early, and he never hit his milestones. So he was always under the paediatrician, and it was one paediatrician that at 3 years old said, let's have a genetics test. And honestly, they'd been treating him for autism, and I thought that's what they were doing it for. And then we got called in exactly a week later, and we were told that he had Duchenne muscular dystrophy, which we'd never heard of.
I was 20 weeks pregnant, and at my 20-week scan, the sonographer told me that there was something wrong and she needed to get a consultant. But when the consultant came, he explained that he's only got 3 chambers in his heart, and we had to go down to Great Ormond Street for a proper diagnosis, and that diagnosis was tricuspid atresia. It's a life-limiting condition, and we don't know how long he's going to last, whether he'll wake up in the morning or whether he'll make it to adulthood.
The diagnosis came very early then?
Very early, at 20 weeks, yeah.
And how do you feel about the support that you received once that diagnosis had been made?
At first I was told to have an abortion. And I refused.
Well, we didn't know what it was. All I heard was muscular dystrophy. And I remember sitting there and saying to the doctor, that's fine. We can deal with that. And then the doctor's saying, no, this is Duchenne, there is no cure. And I looked at her and I said, are you telling us our child will die from this? And they said, yeah. We naively thought, we fairly naively thought that when we'd got this diagnosis that there'd be agency support, and there wasn't. It was wait for your appointments in Sheffield, you'll get a specialist physio, you'll get a specialist nurse. We only met those December last year, and he was diagnosed with two years into diagnosis, and we met them on the phone for the first time last year. His health visitor rung me, which was one of the worst conversations I've had, and she said how sorry she was for us, and said that she was going to keep him on her books until he was 5.5, and that was the last phone call we ever had of her. We never saw or heard of her again. He got put in touch with his specialist, and it was a disability social worker, a support worker, Annette Darnell, who put us in touch with Andy's, which was great because, to be honest, we were lost, completely and utterly lost. We don't have grandparents that can help or uncles and aunties that can help. We are literally on our own. And so they helped give us some respite. But more than that, they offered us support from people who got it.
It's been a multidisciplinary team approach, so that would consist of your social workers, your family support teams, your spiritual care teams, obviously your nurses who are there, the specialist nurses who are there for that information sharing with families.
It's the reassurance, it's being signposted to areas that they can access. It's about information, that's the key thing, and it's about clear communication, and it's about establishing trust, and I think if families feel supported and they feel they can trust the clinicians and the advice that they give, then that then links into hospices and other provisions, and then you can get this more holistic approach. I think that's important. It's about working together to provide, the ultimate care really, and support for the child and the families.
We had gone down to Birmingham again to discuss my options with my surgeon, where he always says it's your choice. In the April time, I had scans again. I'm now in remission. I decided to go back to college to get some kind of normality back to my life again. I'm now studying level 3 health and social diploma at college. I've also got my prosthetic leg, so I'm learning to walk on that. And yeah, just back to normal life again.
It was very difficult at the time, and the support when we were actually in hospital was okay. But the problem is that we only have, I believe, 6 cardiac centres in the UK now. So we lived originally in Norwich, which meant we had to drive all the way down to London. And when I mean drive, I mean blue lighted ambulance for 2 hours in a blue light ambulance, sirens going, 80 miles an hour all the way down to London. When he eventually crashed at 8 weeks. The only real support I have is from the hospice here at St Andrews. And I do occasionally phone up Little Hearts Matter for support there, but there's nothing through the council or through the education services. You get 0. Sometimes I just want to be mum. I don't want to be pointing out all the things that we need and issues that we need. I just want to be mum.
Those first initial month or two, we had a lot of support. We had endless appointments. It felt a bit like the house was just swarmed on by different people. So we had the occupational therapist round, the physiotherapist round, the speech and language therapist round. We had all different people coming in and doing these assessments, which felt great and really, really helpful. And we got a load of equipment.
At the point of diagnosis, that you got quite a lot of support sort of pretty immediately.
Lots of practical stuff
that
very
continue?
immediately. No. It got less because so much of what she needed was around equipment, and what we needed was around people to speak to that had kind of been through, who'd been through or were going through similar things and then could respond, so that we could kind of come up with solutions with other people.
Did you not have that?
And they could respond, no, absolutely not. I mean, there were times before that where I phoned social services asking for support and I didn't get anything. I was regularly phoning them in tears saying, I'm really struggling. And we just weren't eligible for anything at all. And then you're told that, there's children's continuing care. So literally we became eligible for that the week that she died. It's not, and we didn't need millions of pounds. We need to do everything we can to support them, and there is stuff out there, but we just don't have the speed in our processes and the responsiveness in our services to understand how these really very rare, complex conditions work, and there's no trust in families. At first, we didn't want the hospice because we'd been told that we had time. So I decided and that we needed, just so that we knew the staff, we needed to engage and get used to it. And that was where we met the other people who'd said, oh yeah, I was also told that my kid was going to die when they were a baby, and now they're like 15, and now they're 25, and now they're... So that, and that was absolutely invaluable, just having that place where there were other people like Thea.
Thinking back on your journey, what do you think is the best support that you have?
I would definitely say my youth worker, Kat, and my teacher, Jo. They was big helps throughout it all. Any questions I needed, any help, if I was feeling down, they were always there. If I was ever bored, I needed something to do, they was there. And I think they really helped support my grandma as well. When my grandma needed that sort of support and help, they was there for her as well.
Occupational therapy have been really good. They came out and assessed the house and said, well, it's not really accessible for him because he struggles with stairs and things.
What's been the best support that you've had?
Annette Darnell has been amazing. She's from the disability social work team, and Andy's, the normality that they bring, the reassurance that they bring and the support that they offer.
What do you think is the single most important area of improvement from your journey? What would have been the most useful thing to you that didn't happen?
Consistency of someone who was assigned to your family, because I never realised how difficult the journey is. You're dealing with, obviously, the illness and the disability side, but you're also dealing with the grief of what your child will never have or do. And then you're dealing with siblings who are, they get left behind. They're just as affected as you are. And then you have this guilt that, are you putting all your time into one child and you've got others, and how do they feel about it? And then they have a guilt that if they say anything, they then feel it's really difficult.
I always thought that the H word, me in hospice, was the terrifying words, and where children just go to die. I didn't realise that you could have like daycare and that they can mix with their peers and children with similar conditions, that they could have days out, that the parents could have respite care. It was a terrifying word for me. And when it was first mentioned to me, I just burst into tears, not the hospice.
I think my advice to other parents is speak to other parents with kids with disabilities. I was part of this Sunflowers Children Actions group. That's brilliant. It connects you with other parents. He goes to a disability football team on a Saturday morning, and that's linked us in with other kids and parents, and they're your support. They're your network. It's so isolating and lonely, these journeys.
We're a 24-hour, 7 days a week service for children with respite. So we provide respite care. The children come each week, just for a night, to give the parents a break. So we have that continuous support. Lots of activities, so based on what the child wants to do. So it may be that some children enjoy doing arts and crafts. We have lots of sensory play to encourage development, and we'll work with schools and parents as well. So if the child's particularly developing in a certain area, then we'll try and promote that a little bit more.
The holistic support, and I think the setup that we have with oncology children is really good because we have the networking leads and there's always somebody on call there. That would be great if that could be developed for the complex children as well. And I know Martin House and some of the hospices have expanded that recently, but it would be great if we could have that across the region as well.
I think what we're seeing is children living with these conditions that are progressive, life-limiting conditions, but they're often associated with multiple different specialities involved in their care. And I think that's where it can become disjointed, because they may be under neurology, they may be under urology, maybe under cardiology, but which one, who's taking lead? Who pulls all of that together? And I think that can be where it maybe doesn't happen quite so well in some cases. That's not saying that's for all, but I think for me, that's where potentially it does become lost a little bit.
Yeah, because I think each area is focused on their area, that there's not, it's that holistic approach that's kind of lacking. It'd be great if you could have one person, say at Sheffield, that could advocate hospices, or they could be involved with the MDTs and go to all the meetings, and then that would be a brilliant opportunity then to kind of bridge that gap.
We know that there is a higher proportion of children that are living out there with these life-limiting illnesses, and it's about how do we capture all of those children. Our goal would be to try and then have centres which would be then closer to home. So we find that obviously there's families that want respite, there's families that want daycare, there's families that want some care within the home, but how, for those families living further afield, how do we get to them? How do we deliver care nearer to them? Some of that we would like to deliver is trying to think of information of can we do sessions with with parents around education, can we bring in some of the specialists to do talks and group sessions? It doesn't all have to be about respite and end of life, it's about all of the other things that we can offer as well. And I think that's really valid for us as a hospice, that we need to make sure that the provisions that we deliver meet the needs of all of these children and young people and their families that are living with a life-limiting illness, and making sure that that care is accessible to everybody in some shape or form.
So I was teaching my sister at the midnight. I was teaching her what to do with the morphine and the paracetamol and all of that. And then I taught her what to do. This was midnight, went to bed, and after about half an hour I heard a noise, and I went into Thea's room and she was really struggling to breathe. And then that just got worse and worse. So I phoned the hospice. I knew there was no point in phoning 111 or 999 because I didn't really know what was going on. So I phoned the hospice, and the nurse spoke me through what to do. The nurse was going to come to our house, but then Thea's breathing got to the point where I was really worried, so I called 999 for an ambulance to take her straight to the hospice, not to the hospital. And then the nurse from the hospice said she would meet us at the hospice, but the paramedics were really sweet. They were only about 12, and they'd never seen anything like it in their life. They'd never come across a child that had a do not resuscitate order against them. They'd never been told not to try chest compressions. It's just because her organs were all out of place, so she wasn't allowed chest compressions. They didn't really know what to do. They were slightly flummoxed, but they were absolutely lovely. And we had the nurse on the phone from the hospice telling them everything what to do. But I mean, for a long time, we were just at home with the ambulance outside, and these paramedics we really think she should go to hospital, and you're telling us not to take her to hospital. We'll never know if that was the right decision or not, but we went to the hospice, and within a few hours, so she had some clonazepam stuff, really hardcore medicine that we had at home for really bad seizures, and and then so we brought that with us, and she had some of that, and she was all right then for a few hours, and we thought she was going to pull through, and then it just started again, and she just couldn't breathe. There was just too much pressure, I think. It was, and then she passed away at about 4 a.m.
How I came to know about St Andrew's Hospice and the facilities it provides was when my grandson died. He was a much loved and wanted baby. My daughter had him via IVF, so he was like a miracle baby. When he actually died, one of the staff members at Sheffield Children's Hospital told us about St Andrew's Hospice and the facilities that are provided here. And they were really good. They arranged to come and get him from Sheffield. We went with the lady in the car from St Andrew's Hospice. She arranged paperwork and everything to be able to transfer Jacob to St Andrew's Hospice. They'd prepared a room for him that was already cold. There was a crib in there, a swinging crib, so he could be put in the crib instead of going to a funeral home. And they played lullabies to him, and it gave my daughter time to accept his death. And also.
So I've worked in this team for about a year now. Prior to that, I worked at the hospital. At the hospital, I never witnessed any end-of-life care, but here, sadly, we lost 2 children in the summer in a really close succession of each other. The child I care for was only diagnosed with the condition in February of this year, and then became quite unwell in a short space of time. It was only about 3 weeks until he passed away, so my experience of end-of-life and palliative care was kind of rolled into one. It's important that we know and understand the medications that we give at that stage,
why we give them what they do and why it's helpful for the child. We work closely with Leeds Hospital, the outreach nurses, an oncology nurse specialist in Hull as well. So during the end-of-life visits, we might need to tweak the medication to see if that has a positive effect. And there are always phone calls between us and Leeds to assess that. Providing support for the family is really important. And the Band 6 nurse who led the team did an amazing job. I felt really lucky to learn from her giving that care. She was really good in caring and just perfect, a really good example. I just felt like she knew the child and the mum and what they wanted. She just knew what to do at the right moment on every time and every visit.
We had a young man recently, and the nursing team that were involved already knew the young man because they'd been involved because he was an oncology patient and we do the oncology blood, so we built up that rapport already, and the parent absolutely relied on the community nursing team for that support at the end of life and called upon them when they needed to, and it was more than just doing the syringe driver. They did a lot of kind of end-of-life stuff and memory making and some really nice things, some of it done quite late into the evening, but just some really nice supportive visits and doing paintings and footprints and things like that.
I think there's a perception that actually hospice care is ultimately for end-of-life care. And I think that may be more with families that don't access a hospice. And I think with clinicians and other professionals, I do feel that they're aware of those services, but I think society, the public, do lack that awareness of what we are here for. And there is so much that can be provided by a hospice. It's that emotional support, it's that respite care, it's those memory making, it's those fun times, it's getting those children, young people and their families through very tough times and trying to give them a better quality of life at the time. And yes, we would be here at end of life, but it's about that whole journey with the family and the child.
They'd prepared a room for him that was already cold. There was a crib in there, a swinging crib, so he could be put in the crib instead of going to a funeral home. And they played lullabies to him, and it gave my daughter time to accept his death. And also, it's still hard to talk about, even though it's 6 years ago. Well, he was here for about 10 days until his funeral. And she was even allowed to place him into his coffin herself on the day of the funeral, so she could be with him. And as well as being that room for Jacob, there was also a flat where she could stay if she wanted to. So she only lived around locally though, so she went home, but that facility is there, and I don't think people know that St Andrew's Hospice offer these different things. I think people see it as a place where people go to die. I didn't know, I live in Grimsby and I didn't know that this service was available. You hope never to have to use it, but it's nice to know that it's there for people that need it at a time when they really do need it. And we could pick him up, we could cuddle him. You can't do that in a funeral home. Even to providing coffee and biscuits, you know, for when we visited Jacob, you know, the staff couldn't do enough for us. And I always made sure they went and checked on Jacob when we weren't there. They checked on him, they played him music when we weren't there. So we knew he was being looked after, even though we wasn't with him 24 hours a day.
So from the hospice, they were brilliant. So we stayed at the hospice for several days. We kind of lived between there and home. Like all my family came up the day that she died. So my sister had already been with us, my brother and my parents, and everyone kind of descended on the hospice. And then so I feel like it was a week, but I don't think it was that long. Because I remember that we had to move the body because it was starting to break down. So anyway, I don't really remember how long it was, but it was just so nice to be able to have a space where she was, and we could kind of slowly, in our own time, come to terms with what happened and go home but not go home. So I really didn't want to go home at all, but my husband really did. So eventually, I think it was about 2 days before I went home. But it meant that we got that very slow transition that we were all able to do in our own time, which was really nice. And then we arranged the funeral, and we had the funeral, and there wasn't. Recently, I've had some excellent support from the hospice, bereavement support, but at the time the hospice was actually going through loads of transitions. They didn't have much in the way of counselling and stuff available. But now they do. I mean, now they do. Their family support team is phenomenal. Me and my husband eventually convinced Relate to see us for a little while, because they had a scheme for low income, which they put us on. So we only had to pay, I think it was like £25 instead of £50. So we saw them for a little bit, but my husband still wasn't working, so we couldn't carry that on for too long. But so that was really helpful. I think that got us through a tough time. But there's not really there is absolutely nothing on the NHS. Every number I was given had shut down. Crews didn't operate in our area. It was just there was not really anything.
We have our own in-house bereavement team, so they outreach to obviously any child that would be within our catchment area of St Andrews would see those families. Families have to be open to wanting to access. So as part of our review processes or referral process of accepting children onto the books, we offer that service. So we offer that we've got a family support, bereavement, spiritual care team that are available. Now, it's not for all families. I think sometimes it's that lack of awareness of what that service may offer. I think a lot of the conversations at the moment for bereavement maybe do take up at the lead up to bereavement, when they're possibly some time away from that happens through us. I would say, and it's maybe something that we could work on to happen sooner. Some families will engage at an earlier stage, won't they?
And it's also flexible, isn't it? Because from when a child is referred at that stage, they might not want to access, but then as time goes on and those relationships are established, then they might decide to access bereavement support or spiritual support or well-being, any of that kind of support. Education usually kind of kick-starts that off, because that's when it starts. So we can be invited to all the ESCO meetings and things in that. So we're kind of involved at that stage as well, aren't we, to try and ensure a smooth transition process.
Yeah, so we would take children and young people up to the age of 25, depending on their level of need and what is appropriate for them. Now, transition, I think, is an area probably nationally that needs to improve. It should happen at 14, maybe earlier, depending on the competence of that child and their knowledge base. And those conversations should start early. Now, that needs to start in all areas. So that needs to start in the hospital settings. It needs to be starting in the hospice setting. But what we're finding is there's often a gap. So for some of these children with very complex needs, that transition is incredibly difficult because there is a gap where there is lack of service. We find that from paediatrics that there's this very nurturing, family orientated feel to the services that we provide, and then that transition into adults is such a difference. And not that it's not nurturing or caring, but it's a lot more independent. And you go from a huge level of support as a family holistically to an adult journey that is very focused around that young person, and that can be incredibly tough on the families, as well as then lack of services that are at that sort of late adolescent years, which I think is very difficult for families.
We had a young lady that had an oncology diagnosis, and she was just coming up to 18, so we actually kept her on until she was 19, and we looked at doing joint care with the adult service and supporting that transition over, and we would support wherever we can, really.
So who makes the decision as to when that transition takes place?
It can be anybody's decision. We should be working with them from that. It could be us as a hospice that we're trying to initiate those talks sooner. It can be that from a medical perspective that a consultant may liaise on that element of care, that they're recognising that, you know, that they're getting to a point that this care is going to be transferred over. It may be that from a hospice perspective where that little bit later than maybe the medical side of things. In areas that I've previously worked, we've had transition leads. So within the hospitals, we've had a transition worker. Here, what we have at a hospice is we're trying to establish like a transition link, so a link role. So we've got those people that take that interest in transition and can keep their eye on those children that we need to start thinking about transition in their care. It's about making sure that they know who those professionals may be that they will be going to. It's the services that are available to them and making them aware of those things. It's thinking about long term, obviously, if they can't communicate for themselves or if they've not got capacity, once they hit that age of, we need to legally be having parents, you know, who is that person going to be that advocates for that child, and putting processes in place for that and making sure that they're done and not just assuming that they've not got a voice.
Young people with life-limiting conditions, as you can imagine, they've been very protected by the family unit or whatever, and clinicians and everything else, and it's about encouraging them to grow, to say, you know, you getting older, you have got a voice. You need to be kind of proactive in thinking about these decisions that you want to make for yourself. So a lot of that can be quite tricky, can't it? Especially for parents, just to kind of just step back, but we're always mindful that we need to kind of promote this self-advocacy.